in that regard.
Are you aware of the high rate of suicide of young LGBTI Australians and how some of that suicidal ideation and behaviour is driven by difference of values with their family and how difficult that is?
To answer the question, I just want to say two things. Firstly, Article 18, Clause 4 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, it says, states parties to the present covenant undertake to have respect for the liberty of parents and, where applicable, legal guardians to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. That's a fundamental human right that cannot be derogated even in times of public emergency in the International Covenant that Australia is a party to. So I think there's
and
another...
how in an Australian context should we balance that with the issue of, you know, that international human right with the psychological consequences of possible suicidal ideation and self-harm from these young people?
I think it's doubtless there's a number of things that the government can do to help young people in this circumstance. And I don't for a minute say that they shouldn't. However, if the government is going to, as part of that, get involved in the parent-child relationship, that's very concerning. There's a very interesting case at the UK High Court recently where the named persons scheme was challenged in the High Court. The named persons scheme was, I think it was it was proposed by the Scottish government, and it was to essentially have a non-parental role model appointed by the state to have pretty close association with children of parents. Now, that named person scheme was substantially struck down by the High Court, and the High Court said words to the effect that it is the mark of a totalitarian society that they distance children from their parents. And there was a fairly extensive statement to that effect. It was very powerful, and I think it rings true. That if you're going to get involved in the parent-child relationship, that is the wrong way, coercively, that is the wrong way to deal with that problem.
And what if that parent hands their child over to the church and has the church seek to counsel them about their sexuality, and as a result of that, that child tries to commit suicide? I've had people very close to me where that has been exactly what has happened.
Look, it's a... I mean, I don't like to just use the hypothetical excuse, but there are many, many kinds of injustices that can be perpetuated in all manner of forums.
So you would acknowledge that's unjust?
I would acknowledge that there can be very misguided counselling of people, not just LGBTI people, but any people in any issue, and that's unfortunate. And so again, I'm not sure that the government can make that right.
But you can understand why the Labor Party
I understand the Labor Party's motivations. I do. I think they're misguided.
So what should government do when people seek to hand their children over to the church for this kind of counselling? Not interfere at all? Not make it a child protection issue?
Look, it's substantially outside the scope of the religious freedom provisions in this particular bill, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, you put it in your submission. And
what I put in the submission, I've answered.
Well, it's here in, it's here in. What relationship does this issue have to the context of same-sex marriage?
The reason it's in the submission is because we wanted to show, and this was the last point of my opening statement, we wanted to show that the issue of same-sex marriage actually has substantial rights-based implications. There's an argument out there that changing the law on marriage really only affects marriage itself, and that these flow-on consequences to freedoms, as we're discussing here, or even broader freedoms like associational rights, religious rights, speech rights, or flow-on consequences into fields of gender identity and family, all those sorts of things. There's an argument that that's irrelevant. We're just talking about marriage. And what we want to show is that actually marriage is quite a fundamental thing. It's a fundamental law that sort of reaches tentacles into each of these areas. And that's the purpose of that discussion.
It reaches tentacles. So what are the exact legal links between the Marriage Act and these areas? Because I can't see any.
Well, again, international human rights law is actually instructive on this very point. Article 23 of the ICCPR, it says that marriage, it doesn't just define marriage as something that exists in isolation. Firstly, it says that the right to marriage carries the right to found a family, so it links those two things. The second thing it does is it says that marriage is the natural fundamental group unit of society. So it also links marriage in with society at large. And philosophically, it makes a lot of sense because it says, well, if you've got the natural fundamental group unit of society, that is the group unit by which society is naturally produced, male-female relationships.
Why would you deny many thousands of families access to the institution of marriage if that's what you purport it to be? Are you saying that LGBTI people with children aren't families?
Well, no, I'm not. But what I'm saying is that marriage is the union of a man and woman. It's the natural fundamental group unit of society. It's the union by which society is naturally produced. That's what links it to marriage, man and woman marriage, and that's what links it to effects throughout society at large. So I actually think on the international human rights law understanding of marriage, it's apparent, it's quite clear that actually the apprehension there is of man-woman marriage because of the language that's used. And it makes the connections that we discussed fairly clear, I think.
I would beg to differ in relation to, as the nature of Australian family formation and, the manner in which that's carried from international human rights law into Australian law. But